Alrighty, so this is part two of my Christian journey. This is gonna be a follow up to part one, and in the first part, I kind of just did a quick little intro of why I'm doing the series, where I kind of started, and where I'm at now. So, yeah, quick little recap. So I just barely returned to the faith within like the last year, and when I say return to the faith, I grew up Catholic. And for people that don't know, because it's really surprised by how often I hear this, but there are a lot of people, Christians more than anyone, that just didn't know that Catholics are Christians. So when I was younger, I used to get that a lot, and when I kind of walked away from the faith, it was honestly because of a lot of that rhetoric I was receiving. That when I tell someone I went to Catholic church, they're like, "Oh, you're not Christian. You're Catholic." They're two different things, and that always bugged me, growing up. And then when I just walked away from Christianity altogether, it didn't bug me at all. If anything, I was one of those people kind of taking shots at the church because I was arrogant. I thought I knew what I was talking about. I thought I understood, what I understood. And yeah, part of coming to faith, coming to God is humility. Humility in your own understanding, in what you think you believe. Um, and yeah, just kind of like just re-examining everything you think you know. Okay, so kind of getting into this quick recap. So around June of last year, I made the decision to actually read the Bible from the beginning. Just start at the beginning and just work my way through. Currently, I'm at Galatians, which is, if you don't understand how the Bible is set up, there's the Old Testament, there's the New Testament. And just real quick, this video is more for people either new to the faith, or for people that left and are coming back, or people that have always been kind of lukewarm and never really looked into it. So this is more for entry level kind of people. If you're someone that is very knowledgeable about the faith and read your Bible and stuff, then you go ahead and skip this part. All right. But I'll do a little explanation because I feel like this really helps people that just don't know. All right. And at one point, I was one of these people until recently. So that being said, if you look at the Bible, there's two parts. There's the Old Testament, there's the New Testament. Old Testament is everything before Jesus. New Testament is about Jesus and everything after. All right. Old Testament starts with Genesis. Just another recap. Sorry, I just feel like I like doing these explanations because I feel like there's just some stuff that people that do study the Bible, it's second nature to them. But people that are new or don't really study it that in depth aren't aware of this. But the Bible is not just one book. It's a collection of books. It's about, depending on the version of the Bible, it's either 66, 67, 72, depending if it's like an Orthodox or Ethiopian Bible, it could be almost 80 books, right? And the reason for that is, over time, there were different authors for different books. Some of these books weren't books originally. They were scrolls. They were, I don't know if any of them were tablets. I think some of them were put on tablets, but for the most part, they were scrolls. All right, and over time, they got translated, transferred to actual paper, and then eventually the Bible was thrown together by collecting a certain amount of books and putting them in a certain order, and then we got the Bible. All right. But yeah, kind of learning that is kind of where I began my journey. Is when I started reading the Bible, my first question was, okay, I'm not going to ask anyone where to start. I'm just going to start at the beginning. And my biggest question was, what version of the Bible? What version of the Bible should I use? Even to this day, I'm still wrestling with this question. So my advice to someone new is, thanks to modern technology, we have the convenience of this thing called the Bible app. And I'm not getting paid, and I'm not an affiliate or anything like that for this. It's just super convenient, and I think there's other versions of it. But the Bible app is the one I use. It's the one I see most people use. Essentially, it's you go on the marketplace, download it. Essentially, you can pick any version of the Bible that's in English, and you could read through it on your phone. And then if you feel like it, which is what I like to do, is you could switch between versions of the Bible, and you could click on a specific verse and have specific versions you want to compare it to. So when I first started, I didn't know what to start with. I think I started with the New International Version, which is, I feel like it's a popular one people like. Then there was the NLT, which is the New Living Translation. The King James is just one I've heard a lot. It's one of the people think it's one of the harder ones to read, and in the beginning it was a little harder to read because it is older English. There's a lot of thous and these and Shakespearean type of language. But you know, my journey of just trying to figure out what version of the Bible to use, I just learned so much. All right, when trying to figure out what denomination of church I want to go to, because I didn't go to church right away. I read the Bible on my phone for months before I actually stepped into another church, because I wasn't sure. You know, in the beginning, I was kind of doing it just to either convince myself that I was justified in walking away from the faith, or two, I was going to allow myself to be convinced to come back. All right. I kind of made that decision as soon as I picked it up that, you know what, one or two outcomes. One, I'm going to be convinced that I was in the right when I left, to basically leave the faith, you know, to basically, what do you call it? I was justified in walking away because, you know, as I'm reading it, this doesn't make sense. It contradicts itself. All these, I guess you could say, propaganda about the Bible I've read and heard throughout the years that made it easier for me to walk away. Or, and this is the thing that in the back of my head, I had a feeling this was going to happen, which is why I was okay with it, is reading the Bible would bring me closer to God. And lo and behold, that's where I am now. So I would say yes, reading the Bible from scratch, from the beginning. Ecolations is the book I'm currently on. It's a little bit past halfway through the Bible, so I'm like a little over halfway done. But that's just reading in order. There are other passages, like in the later part of the book, I've been going to Bible studies more recently. I've been going online. I've just been really thorough with my studies. So, you know, I've jumped around the Bible a lot. But as far as reading it all the way through, I've read more than the first half of the book, and then a lot of jumping around on the back half of the book, which is the newer stuff, which is the New Testament. All right. And growing up, going to Catholic Mass, there was a lot of readings from the New Testament. Some, not as much from the Old Testament, but definitely a lot from the New Testament. So there was already a lot of readings I was familiar with that as I was going through it, whether in Bible study or watching videos on YouTube about it. Like, I was already familiar with the passages. I just didn't understand them that well, right? But what I got out of the Bible from reading it from the beginning is basically the backstory of what happens with Jesus. You know, for people to understand, like, the Old Testament was, like I said, it's before Jesus. It's Genesis, which is the beginning of the world. People want to throw times on it. From what I understand, people make the assumption that Genesis, the Garden of Eden, the beginning of the Bible, is about 2,000 years before Moses. Now, or from Noah, or whatever. But someone correct me if I'm wrong. I don't ever remember seeing a number about how long that is. All right, there are assumptions, there's predictions, but people don't really know how much time had passed from when Adam and Eve were on earth to when Moses comes around, because Moses is a big figure. All right, Moses was the one that the 10 Commandments were given to. Genesis is one of the bigger books. It's in the beginning. There's like 60 chapters. It goes from Adam and Eve through getting kicked out of the garden, to Noah and the flood, to Abraham, to Isaac, Jacob, Israel, the 12 sons of Israel. That's a lot of story in the very first book. All right, there's a lot of stuff happening in that very first book. And honestly, I'd be honest, you know, there's certain parts of the Bible where they're going over genealogy, where they're going over, like, this person had this son, and this person had that son, and this person had this many people, and they're at this place. Going through the Bible, the thing that became very clear to me is the Bible is very specific. It's not vague. It's not like they're guessing. It's like whoever wrote it, they had some kind of knowledge of, they knew. Like, whoever wrote it, they knew what they were talking about. They were very specific, all right? And if they weren't specific, you know, the verse was short, and it told you what it knew, all right? And going through just Genesis, it was like my mind was blown, because I learned so much I not known before, all right? And a lot of the older stories was kind of like how the world started, why Adam and Eve were punished, what they did wrong, you know, why there was a flood. Like, from Adam and Eve to Noah and the flood, unspecified amount of time. All right, I want to make that clear. Unspecified amount of time. It could have been 1,000, 2,000, tens of thousands of years. I don't know. I don't want to throw a number on it. I don't want to go too deep into that. There's all these other books that give more numbers and stuff on how long that was. But, my background before I started reading the Bible was I was really into looking in ancient civilizations, like who built the pyramids, why ancient structures around the planet. Like, if you see some of my older videos, if you go to my website, see the blog I posted like a few years ago, I go into detail on basically, the ancient Egyptians that we know of today, even the ones that are mentioned in the Bible, they couldn't have built the pyramids. They're too complex. Even today, it would be hard to mimic that exact pyramid, like the ones in Giza, like those 3 giant stone megalithic structures. They're not just the pyramids. There's megalithic structures around the world that are just like, how could have anyone with primitive technology be able to build any of these, let alone move them? And why were they so prevalent around the world? Now, from a secular view, people want to quote aliens, people want to alternate history, all kinds of theories, right? But if you go from a biblical view, they don't go into too much detail in the Bible about it, because there was a reason why there was a flood, all right? That whatever's going on during that time, God was not happy with it. He wanted to get rid of it. He did not like it. So my perspective, my just kind of like light bulb that went off in my head is, it's not important. It's not important because whatever is happening, if Atlantis is real, or if ancient civilizations actually existed, how long they existed, all of that's irrelevant, because God decided that he didn't want that on planet Earth anymore. And his reason for flooding the Earth, he doesn't need to explain to us. One theme you get from the Bible is God is just, he is mighty, and that if he decided that he wanted to get rid of that part of the planet, who are we to question him, and who are we to ask, well, what was going on during that time? If he flooded the earth to erase things, he doesn't want you to know. I mean, that's just kind of my 2 cents. So even though it's interesting, I want to look into it, and there's other, literature I could look into to like get more details about it, it's much less at the front of my mind. All right. It's everything that's happened since then that's a little bit more important. So going through the Bible, and I'm just kind of walking you through like my thought process of like kind of what brought me back, is that, knowing all those secular theories of how the planet was different back then, and that the Bible kind of addresses that. It addresses it that like, yeah, no, there was other civilizations, this planet was very different in the beginning. And then one day God decided like, you know what, I'm sick of this planet, what the people are doing, I'm just going to start over. And then he wiped the earth out with a flood, and then they started over. Now, the part of the Bible that I was not really familiar with at all was what happened from Noah's flood all the way up until Moses. Like, people that understand the story of Moses, they understand that if you ever seen the Prince of Egypt, the cartoon that came out kind of made it really easy for me as a kid to understand the basic story was, or to watch the 10 Commandments, that old school movie. Basically, he was in a basket. He was supposed to get killed by the Egyptians. He wasn't. He ended up becoming Egyptian royalty, turning on the Pharaoh for trying to defend a Hebrew slave, and then going into the desert, coming back, freeing his people. All these plagues happened. He walked the people through the Red Sea, and that's kind of like the highlights of the story. But there's so much stuff that happens before that and after Noah's flood. All right, and the theme that I got from it was, God basically, he had mercy on humans and the planet when he essentially allowed Noah to build an ark. Like, he could have just been like, screw all the humans, wiping the complete planet out. But one recurring theme in the Bible I noticed is, no matter how harsh God seemed, he always had some form of mercy, some form of, what, I can't let my complete wrath come down on you guys, because it's like the vibe I got from reading the Bible was that God is like an extremely strict parent that will come on down on you as hard as he needs to, but at the end of the day, he still loves you. All right. But people are like, how can a God that wipes out an entire planet love you? It's like, well, you don't really understand how bad it really was. All right. I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit. As far as stories go, I don't want to go too much into the Bible study. That's not the whole point of this video. It's more of just let you know how my thought process got to where I am now. But as I was reading it, got through Genesis, got through Exodus, and then I got to, I think it was Numbers, or not Numbers, yeah, Numbers. What you find out when you read the Bible is the first 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and then Deuteronomy. These first 5 books make up the penta something. There's a word for it. The first 5 books, all right? These are all written by Moses, and I didn't know that, and I thought that was pretty interesting. So by the time Moses comes around, God basically is like, look, you know what? I want you to start recording everything that's happened up to this point. And here are all the highlights. This is what people to know. All right. So he wrote those 5 books. Okay. And crazy is that I thought party to the Red Sea was a highlight of what happened with Moses. And then like all the plagues in Egypt and stuff like that. But the highlight is what happened in the desert afterward, at least for me now, because of all the stuff that happened. Is God basically was like, look, you are my nation of Israel. I'm going to put you guys on a pedestal. I'm going to make you guys a nation above all of the nations. Basically saying that you are my people and I'm going to raise you above everyone else. All right. So what happened was, you know, those people that are walking through the desert, immediately once they got out of Egypt and they started walking through the desert, what did they do? They started complaining. They started complaining, they started moaning, they started griping about walking through the desert. Why did God bring us out here? We're going to starve to death. And God was just like, Moses, do this miracle. Have bread fall from the sky. Moses, do this miracle. Strike this rock, water will come out. He kept taking care of them every step of the way. But no matter what happened, at every step of every part of that journey, people complained, people disobeyed, people just did the most, all right? Disrespectful stuff to God. And I kind of laughed at a few parts. There was one, I think there was one passage where they're griping about something again, and God talks to Moses. He's like, Moses, Aaron, which is Moses' brother, the 2 he talked to the most. He's like, step out of the way, I'm about to kill these people. He basically tells them, move out of the way, I'm about to smite them. Like, I'm so sick of their stuff, you know. I laughed only because a part of me could relate. A lot of people, modern times, there's this running joke that like, I'm sick of people. I'm sick of people. People are dumb. I hate going to the store. I hate interacting with the people. Da, 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 da. Ironically, God got to that point with these people where he was just like, I am so sick of you guys complaining. All right. He was very harsh. He was very, what do you call it, lethal at certain parts of these books where they did certain things. He had some of them killed. He had some of those people stoned. He sucked them up into the ground. He sucked sick snakes onto some of these people at different parts of the journey. And as I'm reading through it, I'm still kind of new to the Bible. I still haven't read enough. I'm just kind of like, man, it's just really harsh. These people really deserve it. Like, I thought this was a merciful God, right? And as I kept reading, you know, it became more and more clear. And it wasn't until like a little more recent that I finally put the final piece together for why that just blew my mind. But, you know, they were in the desert for 40 years. And I thought God was just testing them from the get. No, it's because they had been disrespectful and just basically not listening to any of his rules up until that point where he was just like, you know what? None of you deserved the promised land, which I promised. So I'm going to have you guys walk around for 40 years. And this entire generation, all of you that were in Egypt and saw the miracles they did, none of you are going to see the promised land. Your children will, because it's not their fault. But all you adults, none of you are going to make it. All right. The exception being Moses, Aaron, and I think Joshua and Cable or something like that. All right. Don't remember the specifics, but it was a very small few amount of people in the beginning that would, even Moses didn't even see the promised land. Even Aaron didn't even see the promised land. Both of them died by the hand of God before they got to the promised land. But they did last longer than most of the other people. And I thought that was harsh. I'm like, why, man? They did all this stuff. They did everything God said. You know, they're constantly begging for God's mercy. Intercessions. I'm gonna get back to that topic a little later. Moses and Aaron were basically asking for intercession. They were interceding for the people of Israel. All right, throughout those books. All right, but the part that got me was after this. There's other books. After those 5 books, you get into what they call the history of Israel, up until like 400 years before Jesus. All right, or something like that. Basically, once they get the promised land, it's just a long history of them failing and failing and failing and failing and failing and failing. All right. You know, I used to, because, you know, when you read a little bit of the New Testament with Jesus, at that point, you know, the Jewish people, the Jewish nation is not exactly at the pinnacle of their success and nationhood or whatever. They, you know, I mean, they're conquered by the Roman Empire at this point. You know, they are subjected to rulers. You know, you're like, how great was this nation at one point? What you see is, you know, they conquered this land. God helped them. There was wars, infighting wars, civil wars throughout their history. But whenever they followed God and did what he said, they were taken care of. But the part of it that really got me going was, as this was all happening, like, it's just a theme. It's just a theme throughout the Bible that people will continually walk away from God. You know, going into how the people were treated in the desert by God, he struck some down, he stoned others. I thought that was really harsh. But one theme that really became clear to me recently was, the more you know, the more you're held accountable. The more you've seen with your own eyes, the less excuses you have for disobeying. All right. Modern times, people have never seen the presence of God, felt the presence of God. You know, the smallest miracle is them just believing because they haven't seen anything. All right. Even Jesus says that, you know, blessed are those who have not seen and believe. What about the people that have seen? All right. You got to think about it. The reason God let a whole generation of people die in the desert and only let their children through, I used to think that was really harsh, was those people were in Egypt. They seen the miracles with their own eyes. They seen the Egyptians, you know, just be flabbergasted. Their entire existence was the Egyptians and their gods were like all powerful. And then God shows up and all the 12 plagues upset their entire nation. And for people that don't know, when you want to really get into biblical history, is every one of those plagues was a shot at one of the Egyptian gods. You know, like the blood in the river was like the river god. They had a frog god, which is why the frogs were coming out of nowhere. Like every plague was mocking one of the Egyptian gods. They had a sun god, that's why an eclipse happened. Speaking of which, there was an eclipse today and the rapture didn't happen. And I think it's kind of funny because, you know, in later videos, I'm going to go into, like, there's different types of Christians. There's the ones that do what the Bible says and listen to it, and then there's the ones that want to predict the end of the world and freak everybody out. And as you can see, I'm not one of those, and there's a reason for that, but I'll get into a later video about that. But now I kind of want to just bring home the theme of why I'm bringing up these older books, is that by the time I got to Psalms, you know, you go through the entire history of Israel up until the point they're exiled. Because people that don't know is, once they got out of Egypt, they got to the promised land, they had Israel, and there's wars of the wars. Then the kingdom split into two, and then one of the kingdoms was captured by one empire, and then another kingdom was captured by a different empire, and then they were all exiled, and like there was no nation of Israel for like 70 years or something like that. Basically, knowing that history, New Testament makes a lot more sense, because the theme throughout all those books is the Israeli. I don't want to call them Israelis. There's a difference. Israeli is what you call people from the nation of modern day Israel from. Israelite is what the people from Israel were called in the Bible. There's Israelite and Israeli, two different things. All right. Israelites were the ones from the Bible, the biblical Israel people. The theme with them is, there's even Aaron, who was the brother of Moses. He is even quoted as saying, when Moses went up to the mount to write the 10 Commandments, God told him, hey, Moses, go down there. The people are making an idol. They're making a golden calf. All right. This is blasphemy in the highest form. This is like spitting in God's face. All right. Moses ran down there. He freaked out. He dropped the tablets and he scolded all of them, like, what's wrong with you? And he looks at his brother Aaron and is like, what are you doing? You're supposed to be watching these people. Aaron was like, I'm sorry, Moses. They asked me to do it. You know these people are evil. Depending on the version of the Bible you read, sometimes it's wicked, sometimes it's mischief. But in the older, more accurate versions of the Bible, he uses the word evil. And I thought that was very telling, that God is all knowing. God knows what he's doing. He knows what the people are going to do before they do it. Everything is a test. All right. Um, God knew the type of people he was trying to uplift. And from Aaron's own mouth, these people are evil. Like, what? You even know that these people are like this? And like, why would God try uplifting these people? It goes back to God's love is stronger than his wrath. All right. God's love for us is stronger than our own preconceived notions of ourselves. So in that particular case, God basically was like, he knew what he was raising out, which is why he was incredibly strict. All right. If you know you have, for example, if as a parent, some people are parents, if you know you got a troublesome child and you care about them, you're going to come down harder on them than you would your behaved child, right? This is why God was so harsh. This is why God did the things he did, is he knew he had to put the fear of God, the fear of himself into them, all right? The beginning of wisdom is fear of God, all right? God is almighty. God's more powerful than anything. He's more powerful than the devil. He's more powerful than all the demons in the world, and all the black magic sorcerers, all that evil stuff that you find out about when you start looking into how this world works. All of that is scary, unquote scary, but God trumps all of that, all right? And people that fall for that kind of stuff, when you are afraid of the devil more than you're afraid of God, that's disrespect to God, because that's telling him that you don't view him as powerful as he really is, or you don't view him as just, all right? That he won't take care of you, or he won't protect you from those things if you ask for his protection. Throughout the Bible, God says, do not fear. Angels, when they're presented to people, do not fear, do not be afraid, do not be afraid. I am with you, all right? It's like, some of my favorite passages in the Bible is when God is saying, don't be afraid, I am always with you, all right? I need you to do what I tell you, all right? I need you to go into this nation and fight these people. I need you to go to this place and put yourself in danger. I need you to do these things, all right? But because I'm the one telling you to do it, your faith is, if you're too afraid to do it, then that's basically you're telling God that I don't think you'll protect me, or I don't think you could protect me, all right? Which is disrespect to him, all right? So the point I'm trying to make is that the theme of the Bible is God isn't Jesus. He's not this hippie that modern society has kind of painted him to be. Like, I've heard a lot of stuff that Jesus was like a yogi. He meditated the 20 or something years of his life that's not recorded in the Bible. He was in India becoming, one with nature. He was like another Buddha. I don't believe that anymore, because God, Jesus, I'm calling them the same thing. If you don't really understand the Bible, Jesus became a man around the time he became a man, but Jesus existed before he was born, and he wasn't called Jesus, all right? If you really look in your Bible, you really look into it, from Genesis all the way to Revelation, the entire Bible is about Jesus, all right? It's about everything from the Garden of Eden all the way to Revelation. It's all about Jesus, all right? And, you don't know that when you first read it. I didn't know that reading it. And the more I go back and I reference and I go back and I reference and I go back and I reference, it becomes more and more clear that the Bible is supernatural, that it couldn't have been written by just anybody, and that it is so complex. Because reading through it once, maybe you read through it twice, you might not pick up a lot of this stuff, but there's just so much depth in the scriptures that, like, how could it not have been written by something supernatural? How could it have not been written by something just amazing? All right. And when you start to put the dots together, that this is not an ordinary book, and that there's no way that this was just thrown together by accident, like, that's when, at least for me personally, my faith started growing. Because at that point, I started feeling guilty reading the book. That a lot of the things that I saw the people in the book doing, like not having faith, disobeying, knowing God exists, but then choosing not to listen to him, that is a theme that I think a lot of us can relate to, because most people still do that today. Modern day lukewarm Christians, that is like telltale sign of a lot of us, is that we believe in God, but then we don't listen to him. We believe in God, but then we don't actually do what he tells us to do. All right. And if you saw how God treated people in the Bible like that, what do you think he's going to do with you? and that was a wake-up call for me, was that if I know God exists, and in my heart I believe he exists, I know he exists, why am I not doing what he's telling me? Why am I not obeying his commandments? Why am I not doing my darnest to walk in his truth as much as I can? One, I'm gonna just leave this off here because this video gone longer than I expected, is that, and this is the part that got me, all right? I watch a lot of other people online, Christians, Catholics, whatever, kind of go on their own journey, what brought them to God, their view on it, and everybody's a little different, all right? Everybody approaches it different. God speaks to people differently. But there's this one person on there that basically made a very strong point against lukewarm Christians, which is the people that go to church, yeah, they believe, but they kind of only sort of listen to what the Bible is actually telling them to do. In the Bible, there are verses that make it very clear that lukewarm Christians are worse than non-believers. Lukewarm Christians are worse in God's eyes than non-believers, because at least with non-believers, they don't know, all right? They don't believe, they have whatever reason, they're born in a different religion, they weren't exposed to God or Jesus in a young age, so being cold and have no connection to God has more mercy on them than lukewarm Christians. Lukewarm Christian being someone, like I just said, someone that was like born into the faith, went to church, doesn't really practice it. It's like, yeah, I believe in Jesus, but I choose not to listen to him. That is worse in God's eyes than someone that's a non-believer, all right? And that is one of the biggest motivations I have for even speaking on this video series, because I kind of feel like I fall into that category. I'll be honest. I feel like I've been a lukewarm Christian my entire life, when I was a Christian at all. And, you know, what I'm trying to do is find my own avenue, my own way of being more zealous for God. Because, to be honest, it's becoming more clear for me when I see, you know, people of other religions, Muslims, Buddhists, or, you know, whatever, when they're very passionate about what they believe in, I get jealous. I get jealous not for my own sake, but for God's sake, of like, why am I not like that passionate for you, God, for you, Jesus? Because, you know, it makes it look like they sound convincing to people that don't know. Like, you got to think, is this spiritual warfare? We're fighting for the souls of humanity. They're winning the spiritual war because they're convincing people that don't know any better. Oh, wow, you got this lukewarm Christian over here that believes in their God but doesn't really listen to him, versus the Muslim that's stopping in the middle of work to pray 5 times a day, even though it could be an embarrassing, even though it could be an inconvenience. They're taking the time out of the day to do it. To them, that's like they must really believe in that faith. And it just makes most Christians look horrible, in my opinion. And honestly, I want to change that. I really do. And that's kind of why I'm doing this series. That's kind of why I'm talking about this more, and I'm just going to do my best to work at it. So I'm going to end this video here. It's a little long, and yeah, I just want to see where this series goes, and I just want to be a little bit more open about why I'm doing it, and, you know, just see where it takes me. So